Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode in the Rate of Rise series. And this series has been running for a little bit now. It is elevated conversations on roasting. We have a lot of people in the roasting world in the Keys to the Shop audience of different stripes. A lot of you are retail roasters, and this topical focused series is all about the ins and outs of roasting, whether we're talking about business or the craft or the science and that kind of stuff. So today we're talking about the business. Now, first of all, I want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Mill City Roasters, and you can find them at millcityroasters.com. They have been for quite a long time somewhat of a juggernaut in the industry of not only amazing roasting equipment that is basically just designed to give you the flexibility for your roasting style, but also giving you peace of mind in that it is well built and designed for the roaster of today. And they're not only known for this, but also for education. Their Roasting 101, Roasting 201 classes are phenomenal. They teach at Coffee Fest all the time. In the Big Red Roasting Rig, they have produced tons of videos to help you roast coffee really well. So they have amazing support for their customers and clients, and you should look them up if you're wanting to learn more about roasting equipment, and just get in contact with some fantastic people. Go do that over at millcityroasters.com. Now, today's episode, we're going to be talking with our friend Luke Waite of Pomelo Consulting, which is a consulting company that is focused on helping people run great roasting operations. As the founder and principal of Pomelo Coffee Consulting, Luke is also the creator of the Core 7, which is one of the things, actually the thing we're going to talk about today, which is a framework designed to help coffee roasters achieve lasting success. His background is extensive. It includes working to transform struggling cafes, cold brew companies, and coffee roasters into efficient and profitable, sustainable businesses. And in 2024, he launched Junto, which is a peer-driven coaching group for roastery owners that fosters growth through camaraderie and feedback and accountability. Luke is a seasoned public speaker. He's regularly presenting at the Specialty Coffee Association's Expo, regional coffee festivals, groups of international coffee professionals, and the like. He serves on the management committees for the Coffee Writers Guild and advocates for writers' ethics and journalistic integrity. And he is also currently and has written a book on the Core 7, which is why we're talking to Luke today. I got a little sneak peek of this book, and it is fantastic. Really helpful frameworks for good coffee business. And so this is a book that's a practical guide for helping owners effectively manage their businesses. And so today's conversation with Luke, we are going to be talking about just a few of the Core 7 that he has identified through his own experience in the industry, but also working with clients and discovering what are the things that trip people up the most in roasteries, and how can we head this off at the pass? How can you, especially, make this something that these 7 areas are strengths and not weaknesses? These are points of integrity in your business, and it takes a lot of intentionality, but this book does a great job speaking very plainly to the issues at hand and how you can move beyond them into a thriving business and a thriving operation. So I'm excited to have Luke back on the show, so let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation on the Core 7, helping you run a really successful coffee roastery with Luke Waite. Well, hey, Luke, welcome back to the show.
Chris, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very exciting stuff. One of the things that, we've had you on the show prior, and we got a taste for your perspective on the industry just a little bit. And now, having followed your career even more through Pomelo Consulting and the Levco and the work you do with roastery owners, you've got yourself a cohorts where people will be able to gather in community, roastery owners that are helping each other and community. That's really awesome. Then you've got what we're talking about today, which I'm super excited about, which is a new book yet to be released. And it's all, if I could generalize, it's about roastery operations, a guide to roastery success, I suppose. Tell us a little bit about this book that we're going to be seeing available for purchase soon. Not quite yet, but soon. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yes. Well, so I should say we actually do have pre-orders live at the moment, and I didn't tell you about that before this, but we do have pre-orders live on the website. But the book itself is a framework that we call the Core 7, and it flushes that out. So that's a framework that I developed over the last couple of years to help coffee roasters with the 7 things that I see them trip on most, and those hurdles that are hardest to get over. So that's what the framework of the book is all about, is what are the things that I should focus on if I'm a coffee roastery owner that is seeking to take the business side of their roastery more seriously? How do we make this a sustainable business? That's what the book is all about, is giving roasters tools to be able to take their business from, okay, I'm roasting some coffee and have a couple accounts, to how do we make this thing really hum?
Yeah, the gap between those two positions, where it sounds like when you say take the business side of the roastery more seriously, there is a seriousness that people do have. However, would you say that it's a subsistence level seriousness, like we're getting by, but you don't want them to just get by. We're hoping that we can break through a level to really thrive. You say to really hum. What's the difference between those two places? Because people might say, well, it's working the way it is now. But for somebody like you, as a consultant, as an author, in talking with people about the things they trip up over, you see the potential. So what is the potential that people are missing out on that you're trying to help them realize?
For me, what I have seen with roasters is a ton of passion, a ton of love for what they're doing. And what I have seen with roasters is that they are really, really gifted, but there's these sort of like business hurdles, whether it be sales or whether it be their functioning of the ergonomics of their roastery.
Mm-hmm.
There's these hurdles that just keep them from being able to reach sort of a level of, okay, everything's okay. We have some level of stability and some level of longevity or opportunity for longevity. And so when I was seeing that with roasters, I was just like, man, there's something that's missing here.
Mm-hmm.
And what are these pieces that are missing? Because the roasters are very, very smart, very gifted, very talented people. They're creatives typically. And what are they missing? What is the thing what is this gap here that you kind of referenced? And it's these structural pieces that are honestly not very fun to build unless you have a weird brain like mine. And so that's really the gap in between the gain, right? Is the structural pieces that allow for stability. And a lot of it has to do with building in processes that allow for what I would call sustainability. And I'm not talking about green sustainability or
Right.
sort of eco-friendly. I mean, like, how do we make this thing survive into the future? So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's what I see there is a need for structure and processes to allow for that type of stability and longevity.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess that begs the question then, what are the core 7?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So the first one's obviously sales, and pretty self-explanatory. You need to know how to sell things in order to have a business. The next one's product. And within product, there's a lot of other things that roasteries sell that are not actually coffee. And there's a lot of opportunity that's missed within product as well. The next one's cash management. How do we manage this money that's coming in? If we're going to make this thing sustain it, we got to know what we're going to do with that cash once we get to a healthy cash position. The next one's green coffee. How do we think about our sourcing practices, but how do we connect that to business? Not just like, ooh, I want a tasty coffee, but how do I connect my structure for how I buy, when I buy, what I buy to the business? The next one is roastery operations, meaning how does the actual machine that green coffee comes in the back door, green coffee goes out the front door, how does that machine work? And how does it turn green coffee brown? The next one is people, and how do we think about our people? How do we structure our business in order to allow for people to grow and allow for people to stick around for a while? The last one is wholesale. Most of the businesses that I've worked with in the past have some amount of wholesale. And if there's all sorts of different ways to grow, but one primary one that I've seen a lot of roasteries that want to get to some amount of sustainability, they have some amount of wholesale. And oftentimes wholesale programs are, well, the cafe across the town decided they wanted to buy our coffee, and then this local grocery decided they want to buy our coffee, and then all of a sudden we have 30 or 40 wholesale accounts. What does this mean? So that's the core 7: sales, product, cash, green coffee, roastery ops, people, and wholesale.
Everybody has these 7 things happening right now. If you're running a roastery, these are in place. Whether or not they're good might be the question. Like, you are selling coffee and you have people, and there are, hopefully there's wholesale clients, right? Like you said, they kind of organically develop. And it sounds like what this is offering is a little bit more of an intentional approach, like a strategical approach to how you nurture these 7 areas so that they don't become tripping hazards, but they're more like buckets of things that you put energy into.
100%. And frankly, the core 7 comes out of a framework that when I first started consulting, I had a conversation with a friend of my dad's who does consulting for massive CPG brands. Think like Kraft Heinz and Purdue and massive consumer product companies. And he asked me, he was like, what's your framework for working with clients? And I was like, oh man, I don't know. I need to kind of think about that. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, what are all the things, to your point, what are all the things that happen in a roastery that are a lift? And so you're absolutely right. These are all things that are already happening to levels of, hopefully really good in some areas, and in some areas, some roasteries not so good. And so that's what this is for, is to give them a space to grow and to be able to not be overwhelmed with the massive amount of things that are on their list, and say, these are the 7 things to focus on. Let's focus on these.
Good. I like the enumeration of these. Sometimes people can treat these like they would treat a listicle online, like 5 ways to, get fit in 2025 and that kind of thing. But I like that these are born from a lot of conversations with real roasters, and yourself having a long history in the industry, an effective industry history, that you bring your own expertise as well as the case studies of people that you've been working with and talking to. So I want to think a little deeper about a few of these areas, because we don't have like enough time right now to go through all 7, but a roastery owner who is looking for a level up in these areas, I think it would be good to first, as a preamble, discuss what is it about their mindset and willingness to approach these subjects that needs to be in place. Because I could read this book and then I feel pretty good about having the tools, but we're notorious for collecting tools and insights and feeling like, wow, that really hit me hard, but then we never use it. So what's the proper kind of priming that somebody might need to make it more likely that they're going to apply what they learn here?
Yeah. So I mentioned this in the book too, is that if you read this book, it's not going to solve every problem you're ever going to face. It's not going to, miraculously or give you a golden goose or a ticket to ride or what have you. The mindset that is required in order to implement and improve a roastery in any one of these areas is what I call iterative process optimization. And then it's a fancy way of saying you build a process, you run the process, you make it better, and you keep doing that in every area of this core sevens. And honestly, in maybe even in your own life too, is to consider how do I look at the things that I'm doing and not just do them because that's how I've always done them. How do I step back and say, what's a better way of doing this? What's a more effective way? Do we need to be, doing the same things we've always done? Probably not. So iterative process optimization is the mindset that is really needed in order to implement the things that I recommend in this book.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. I want to kind of jump into the topic of sales a little bit. In the idea here is that, yes, people will sell coffee to people who want the coffee. I mean, once we get past that friends and family hump where we get like true market response to our coffee, there needs to be some kind of an approach to sales that's a real process, like a substantive process here. Mm-hmm. And when you started this conversation, you said people trip over this thing. And I think we try to sometimes, say, we're going to deconstruct the success of other people and try to apply it to ourselves. And we don't know the process that they went through to get what they got. Right. So when it comes to sales, as part of the core seven, what is the wisdom that you want people to take away from that section? That's basically like, if you approach sales this way, you're more likely to get more sales that are sustainable rather than accidental, sales, like happy accidents.
There's a couple of different things to consider here. So I'm going to give two answers. The first answer is going to be for somebody who doesn't have a salesperson. And the second answer is going to be for roasters that maybe have one or more salespeople. So for the owner who is by themselves, they're running sales on their own, the single most important thing that I would advocate for is to establish a process that you do the exact same things every single time. This goes back to iterative process optimization, right? We want to establish a process and do the exact same thing every time. And then go back and look at, maybe I shouldn't have sent out a 5-pound bag sample to that cafe that was interested in maybe switching coffee. Maybe I should do a 4-ounce bag or a 12-ounce bag for those samples. Another example would be like, maybe if you're trying to sell to a grocery, you go into a grocery store and just dropping off samples might not be the approach at a grocery store. Maybe you need to actually go in and say, hey, I'm curious, who does your coffee buying here? And to keep track of those types of actions, to be able to say, okay, when I go into groceries, it's more effective for me to ask who the grocery buyer is than to just drop a sample at the cash register, because that's never going to make it to the coffee buyer. So if you're on your own, keep track of the steps that you're taking for all of your sales, whether it be a grocery or a cafe or an office or a subscription service. Keep track of all the steps that you've taken to get to a sale so that you can go back and say, you know what, I'm actually not going to send cold emails anymore. Or, I'm not going to, drop off samples to these types of accounts.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. For folks that have one or more salespeople, the thing that I want people to take away is your job as an owner isn't to just sign their checks. Your job as an owner is to support them and to provide a continuous feedback loop for these salespeople. Most coffee salespeople, it's their first adult job, and it's their first sales job too. And so if they're selling coffee, you have 100% more experience than these coffee salespeople have. And so even if you as an owner don't think that you know anything about sales, you actually have been in a lot more conversations around sales, a lot more of the challenges that you're going to hear. So those are the things that I would say is make sure that if you're doing it yourself, keep track of all of the steps in the process. If you have a team, make sure that you're supporting them and that you have an active role in their job, not to hover over them, but to actually be a support for them and in their role.
Interesting. Okay. So being a support for your sales team, what's a practical example of that? If I
Yeah.
have a team, in fact, a roastery that goes from no salespeople, where it's just the owner, with one of the hats they wear is sometimes they go out to places and they hand out samples, but they take a chance. They hire a salesperson, they give them a baseline salary or wage, and then they have a commission on top of it. How does support look for that one person or or even a small team when they're really under pressure to deliver, because their paycheck is based on commission largely, unless there's another model?
So support looks, again, for maybe a single salesperson or maybe even a couple of salespeople. Support is going to look like having regular weekly meetings with them. And we're not just there to say, hey, how's it going? We're there to actually talk about what are the actions you're taking each week. We're going to evaluate those, because that's also a conversation between the owner and the salesperson is, hey, maybe they want to try something new. Maybe they're saying, what if we sent out some sunglasses to prospects that just say, we think you're cool on the side, and we want to work with you. Maybe that's an approach. If they want to try that, great. What does support look like in this situation? Hey, I'm going to give you $400, $500, $1,000, whatever, to go buy those sunglasses, get them custom printed, write the cards, maybe with the salespeople. We're going to send those out. And then after the fact, we're going to sit down and say, what was the outcome of sending out these sunglasses and saying, we think you're cool, we want to work with you.
Yeah.
Helping them determine, and maybe that's not a good thing for your roastery. Maybe you don't have that kind of money to spend on something like that. That's fine. Support in that scenario looks like, hey, I love your excitement right now. Frankly, we don't have that kind of money. But let's workshop some other ideas of things that we could do that are within our budget. So having a weekly set time where they're going to report on what they're doing. They're going to walk you through what's worked, what hasn't, and then be able to provide some feedback around, like, this is where we're at as a company. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. That's kind of what that looks like, is literally just being a resource that every week I'm going to have a conversation with my owner. I'm going to sit down. We're going to work through this stuff together. And also for me as a salesperson, if I'm sitting there across the counter from an owner and I'm not meeting my sales goals, to hear them workshop that with me shows and proves that you're not just disappointed in me. You're wanting me to succeed. Again, these are new salespeople. We have to remember that oftentimes we have to remind ourselves as owners that, you know what, they probably have some expectations of themselves that maybe we're not even putting on them. So that's what support looks like, is having a regular weekly sit down where we're going to talk about the same things. We're going to keep improving on what we have done in the past, and we're going to provide context that is needed in order for them to do their job well.
Yeah. Well, that really looks like the kind of thing that brings in more consistency into the equation, where I know if I feel supported, it feels like a more sustainable job to me. And if I feel like it's a sustainable job, I can create relationships with the client, with the wholesale customers, that then for them feels like a sustainable relationship to keep with the roastery. So you represent the roastery. And why wouldn't you, as the owner, want to have your values and culture represented in the speech and the approach of your sales team? So even just having that closeness of relationship and regularity creates this this cohesion across the different places your brand is out in the community. Let's say, okay, we have sales that come to us based on reputation. We go out and we have prospect sales. Like, people say, we do want your coffee. Thank you for introducing yourself to us here. Now we've got money coming in, and it feels really good to have money coming in. It's a validation, because and I know, as we're both consultants, there is a lot of imposter syndrome that comes up when you're running a business. And so your immediate thought is, well, I've got all this money. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z with it. And this is where I know you're saying that we can get ourselves in trouble with the way we handle our cash. We
Yep.
get money and you can't hang on to it. We saw this happen at, 2020. It showed just how little margin we actually have. What do people get wrong about cash management in the business? What's maybe a fallacy that we fall prey to, especially within a roastery context?
When money is coming in regularly, all the shiny things seem interesting, and that new piece of equipment, or that origin trip, or what have you. And I love that. I'm all for that. You need to purchase new equipment to refresh the old equipment, and that's all fine and well. The challenge is not having a structure for what are we going to spend on equipment, what are we going to spend on travel, what are we going to spend on team development, and also how much do I get as an owner at the end of the year if we do really well. So the fallacy is that when things are good, we get to just do whatever we want. And I would actually kind of flip that on its head and say, when things are good, we get to plan and create structure for all of the things that we want to do. Meaning, buy that new equipment, go on trips, team development, that kind of thing. So the fallacy is that when things are good, we don't have to worry any longer. But in those times, it's actually better to set aside and develop a budget. I know this is like very baseline and very not fun, or what people want to hear, but the reality is that you need to develop some amount of percentages for each bucket, whether that be, like I said, team development, education, maybe even for expanding into new markets. We need to start to develop what percentage of our total, bottom line gets split into these different areas, so that we don't end up with a big pile of cash at the end of the year. And then we have to decide, what are we going to do this? Let's spend it so we don't have to pay taxes on it. We need to create a structure for what we're going to do with that money once it arrives. And the best time to do it is when you have cash coming in. The worst time to do it is, when you're starting out and you're developing a structure. You don't know what's real. You don't know how much money am I actually going to make at the end of the year? What's actually going to be left over? So my sort of caution to owners when things start to work really well is to pause and to think through, what do I want to do? Okay. How can I split this into some reasonable percentages across, the different projects I want to do, or the different, capital expenditures I want to make. And then let's develop some structure on how much we're gonna cut that bottom line into at the end of the year.
Well, let's say I'm a roastery and I have, I'm in the black right now, and I've got this money, and it feels like, short of a couple of major urgent things like something broke and I need to fix it, it's nice to have the money to be able to do that. But the strategy stuff you're talking about, like how to distribute that money, it seems like there's a couple of places where you might want to create a plan and structure for reinvesting into the business that secures next year's profitability. So it makes it more likely that you're going to be profitable next year based on how you use the profit this year. What might be a couple of things that we would immediately say you'd probably want to do these two things, because it's more likely that if you invest in these areas of your business next year, you're going to have a better, more likely you're going to profit because you invested this way this year.
Yeah. There's a couple of things here, but the first one that's coming to mind is to think about, what are the types of accounts that we're going after in the next, let's call it 1 to 3 years. So relatively near term. Do those accounts need us to do something that we can currently not do? Meaning, is there are the accounts we're going after, are they going to need us to fulfill, 10x the volume that we're doing right now? If so, what do I need to purchase internally within my business? Do I need to buy a bigger roaster? Do I need to buy a band sealer? Do I need to buy a nitro flesher? What are the things that I need to purchase that will allow me into the future to continue to grow? So I'm sitting on a pile of cash. What am I going to do with this? I could just save it, which isn't a bad thing. Or I can start to think, okay, we're starting to get clients, we're starting to get accounts that are expecting us to fulfill much larger volumes than what we're capable of right now. And if we just keep doing what we're doing right now, we're going to have to hire a bunch of people or, expand our space. What if we just shifted into a larger roaster that could turn coffee faster instead of, just saving that money and seeing what could happen? So that's one area, is to consider what are the types of accounts we're going to get, hopefully in the future, and what do they need of us? This is sort of connected to the same one, is that if there's a particular kind of account that you're going after, I talk about grocery all the time because everybody wants to talk about it. And I'm not going to say if it's good or bad necessarily to go after them. But one of the requirements for large groceries is that coffee is nitro fleshed, at least for larger national brands. They expect that your coffee's nitro fleshed.
Yeah.
So that would be a good opportunity for you if you are trying to expand into grocery and you're sitting on a pile of cash at the end of the year. Maybe it's time to buy a nitro flesher to allow us to then get into groceries that we're trying to get into, to kind of check that box. So that's how I think about it. And that's what I would, if I was an owner of a roastery, that's what I would be thinking about if I'm sitting on the pile of cash at the end of the year, thinking about growth and thinking about investment. What do I need to purchase that can allow me to get the kinds of accounts that I'm trying to get in the next 1 to 3 years in the sort of near term?
Nice. I like that a lot. And it needs to be stated, because just like the shiny object and you mentioned in the beginning, that syndrome we have when we get this cash, the industry really will make it easy for you to spend it. It's really easy. We're very good at it. So in order to do that, to say, okay, we're going to invest in a bag sealer of X amount of size, or an auto filler, that's more accurate than what we have now, for example, or the nitro flesher you were talking about, we have to say no to a bunch of other things.
Yep.
Right. And that feels bad. I'm saying no to that, but that's really good. And so do you ever end up talking to people who feel like they have all these options, they just cannot say no to everything, so they say yes to nothing?
Analysis paralysis, Yeah, I'm thinking of someone I used to work with a long time ago, and they were a roaster, and they just never took action towards anything. Everything was scary. Investment was scary, putting a little bit of money here, putting a little money there. It was always scary. It was always, and so that not saying yes to anything is also a challenge, and not committing full in is also something that is actually can hinder growth. And I think it's Peter Drucker talks about all profit is derived from risk. And so there is an amount of, if we're going to grow into certain areas, we're going to have to say yes to something, which means we're going to have to say no to a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. But it's a double-edged sword, which is why you have to have a clear picture of where are we going as a company. And that's easy for me to sit here and say, I'm in my office in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I get to say that you need to know where you're going. The reality is you need to have a desire for where you're going. And if you can work backwards from there and say, these are the things that I need, these are the mile markers that it takes to get there. What's the next mile marker for me to tackle? And I'm going to say yes to that and only that. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about actually, having a clear picture. Nobody actually does. Most owners that are successful that you look up to, they have just said, this is the direction I'm going. And the route that it took them to get there was probably very different than what they had envisioned it to be. And so to your point, I think that the real thing is, yes, we're saying no to a lot of things, but it fundamentally begins with determining what's the direction we're even headed in. If we don't have that, you're gonna kind of stay in a moment of stasis where you're just not really moving in any direction out of fear or anxiety or what have you.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And you have again, cash is it sounds like this energy, it's potential, it's money that allows you to do things in your business, and those things are done with people in the business. And that's the kind of the next section that I wanted to jump into here, because we're talking about supporting the sales folks. We talked about cash, and cash is like this tool that we can use to better serve the needs of the people that we're serving.
Mm-hmm.
And now when it comes to people, the roastery is one of these places where this is just my perspective, and I've heard it said many times, working as a roaster is really difficult. It's just like hot, heavy work, and it's not the glamour that you get on the, not to make it sound glamorous too much, but it's different than customer facing work. Mm-hmm. And it feels as though sometimes the people part of roastery work, when you've got production roasters and assistants and bag fillers and delivery people and this kind of thing, the culture of the roastery feels like an afterthought. Mm-hmm. And how do you perceive this? What's the thing that, let's say, people trip up on when it comes to people in the roastery mm-hmm. that doesn't need to be there, that you want to solve with this mm-hmm. part of the core 7?
All of the questions that you've asked me so far have all been connected. And that's sort of the way that I look at learning and development and growth, is that the words on the page are important, but the real learning is in the margins. The real learning is along the edges of the paper, where you're taking notes and where you're thinking, when you're pausing. And so the people side of it, it's all connected. To mention a question you just asked about, saying yes and no to things, that's connected to money. And what does that connect to? That's connected to sales. And if we're going to take care of our people well, we have to have all of the rest of those core 6 of the 7 cores. All the other 6 have to be functioning well also. And so when we talk about people, I almost put this as the first core, because you don't have anything if you don't have people. And it's, if you can run a roastery by yourself for a while, but at some point you have to hire people. And so it's all connected to your people. And the reason why this is even a part of it is that you grow a roastery, you start selling coffee, you get some accounts, maybe you open a cafe or 2. And then the next thing you know, you've got 30 or 40 people running around. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm a people leader. I'm a people manager now. And some of the things that I have seen from owners recently is that they've just realized that, like, oh, I'm not prepared for this at all. And that's something that we as an industry need to get better at, is understanding our people need things from us that we're kind of unaware of. And so that's why this is a part of the core, is that it's all connected. We have to make sure that our people are taken care of, and that we're being thoughtful in how we're training them and how we're leading them and how we manage them. What kind of language is allowed in our roastery? Are we here to just churn people in and out? Or are we here to actually give them a place to learn and grow and develop as a professional, to go on and do something else, maybe within your company, maybe not? And so that's why people's even a part of this, is because it's all connected. The impact you want to make, how much money you bring in, is connected to how much you can pay them and compensate them. So that's why people is a part of this.
So one of the things about people, of course, is that people always talk about how people is the hardest part of coffee. And we then in the roastery have just as much of a need to focus on people, although it doesn't seem like it is as much of a focus, because it feels like a lot more of a technical job. Like the culture of it is like, we've got these machineries, we've got these bags, and we're doing this. And then the culture and the way that people are managed or led is a lot more mechanical, it almost seems. But, are we selling ourselves short? And how do you create a dynamic system of caring for people in the roastery that doesn't just relegate them to grunt labor?
For people that work in roasteries, it's a factory job. Just that's what it is. You are producing, taking a raw product and producing a finished product at the end of the day. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And in order to keep your people from feeling that they're just sort of unimportant cogs in machines that, just move green coffee and turn it into brown coffee, you need to provide them with a space to understand what are the opportunities within your business, what are the opportunities outside of your business, and what are the skills that you're learning here that are transferable in other places. So a perfect example is, let's say you're running, let's say you are running a production floor and you are managing wholesale and retail orders. What does that sound like? Well, that's something that is transferable to almost any type of other factory job. But then also, maybe you work at a clothing company that, is able to utilize those same skills. So a lot of people think that the packing and filling is just this sort of factory job. But the reality is that there's skills and things that they're learning that are very transferable outside of coffee. And also, if you want to move up in coffee, there's tons of opportunity for you to be able to move upwards. And oftentimes we don't offer that, as an industry, not owners, but as an industry, we don't really talk about that very much. That what are the things that you can do that are not in this roastery? Fundamentally, folks that work in roasters need to understand that this work that you're doing, if you choose to stay in coffee, it's really important to understand that side of things, because it provides you an understanding of, okay, this is how coffee goes from grain to brown, gets put in a bag and gets put out, for sale. And now if I'm selling coffee, I have a full understanding of what that process looks like. Or if I'm educating, or if I'm running a cafe at a different company, now I understand what that roastery goes through to get that coffee here. So I think that as owners and as leaders, we could do a better job of explaining what does this role mean for the whole coffee supply circle, and helping people understand what are the other options and areas for them to move out of the roastery.
That's cool. Yeah. Expanding your worldview within a tight context, such as a roastery, it feels like it would really impact your work. It would bring a little bit more inspiration, and you would have to be very purposeful to communicate these types of things to your team if you're leading that roastery. And it sounds like when it comes to people in a roastery, you kind of have to have people leadership as one of the job descriptions of somebody who's managing a roastery, not just a head roaster who's really just like a coffee nerd and they're terrible with people, but they produce good coffee, and everybody else is just like Lord of the Flies. We're going to figure it out. So what does that look like? Is that the role? Is that somebody that you would say this person has to be a roastery manager who is responsible for a lot of different moving parts, but one of those things is culture and people and that kind of thing?
I definitely think so, because something that I think about quite often, specifically around roastery operations, is what happens when a wholesale account comes in to pick up their order. Mm-hmm. This is a moment to offer an experience to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To offer a moment for them to recognize, oh, wow, look at all these people. Or maybe there's only one or two of them, but look at how much they're doing. And, oh, wow, I've never seen that machine before. And, oh, I can have some. This is a moment to build culture within your wholesale program. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even a retail buyer comes in to pick up their order to avoid shipping. This is a moment to provide them an experience of your company, of your roastery, that they don't. When else are they going to experience the back end of a coffee roaster? And so for somebody who's leading that, somebody who's managing a roastery, they need to understand that your job is not necessarily just to manage the floor. Your job is also to lead the culture around when a guest comes in to pick up their order, show them around. You are on display, similar to maybe like a server at a restaurant, and to understand that this is not a something to be avoided. This is an opportunity, and as the manager of a roastery floor, that's your job, is to lead culture and to show this is how we interact with the guest that's coming in to pick up their order. And we're going to send them home with a sample, and we're going to give them a cup of coffee on their way out.
Yeah. It's really difficult to do if what you've done with your roastery staff is take the people that are not people and just said, you should be a roaster.
And that's what ends up happening most of the times is they're folks that, they just want to sit behind a roaster, which is totally fine. But as owners and leaders, we need to understand that their role is more crucial than that, and their role is more important. And that also, speaking to your previous question, that gives them an opportunity to understand, oh, I'm doing more than just a factory job. I'm a part of the business. I'm a part of the culture, and I'm a part of influencing that.
The last subject here, I think, is basically everything, which is operations. Because when I think of operations, I think everything that's happening that creates a bag of coffee. And it could be the people and the sales and the obviously the roasting and everything else that you talk about in the book. But with operations, what is it? Because you talk about SOPs, for example, like processes of how to do things. Mm-hmm. Let's start there, because we use the word SOPs quite often, but sometimes we just mean that it's this ephemeral understanding, a cultural like a verbal, I hold so and so and so and so is doing it my way. It doesn't seem like that's good enough anymore. And from SOPs, I'm sure there's a bunch of other places where operations in a roastery can tend to break down pretty quickly, and in such a way that we can't even trace what went wrong, because we just don't have a system. So how could you ever trace backwards if you don't have anything to grab a hold of? So talk to us a little bit about operations here, the importance of it, but where are the areas that roasters today especially should be focusing their energy on to make operations actually hum the way you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so speaking of SOPs, and frankly, all 7 of the cores, the reason why they're important is if you ever want to sell the business, or if you ever want to not be involved every single day, which is fine if you are, but if you ever want that to not be your life, you have to have them. Your SOPs also provide you an opportunity, you kind of hinted at it, provide you an opportunity to understand, okay, this one step in this process is offering us a ton of challenges. So how do we solve that issue? But without an SOP, we can't isolate those problems. And I think about it from the perspective of rhythm. When a drum is being beat, you can tell when the time signature changes. And you can tell when something is not quite in time with everything else. And as a result, that's where we can say, okay, we're going to solve that problem, because there's something in our process is just not in sync with everything else. So let's solve that issue. So that's another reason why I think SOPs are really crucial, is to reduce waste. And whether that's waste, like actual waste of product, or waste of time, or waste of labor and resources. And so on my end of things, when I try to encourage owners to build SOPs for themselves, that's really the 2 things I'm thinking about is, do you want to be involved in every single day for the rest of the time that you own this business? If you don't, then we need to build some SOPs so that other people can run the day-to-day. And the second reason is SOPs allow you to isolate when something is out of sync, and then to solve that issue.
I love that. Yeah. I love the rhythm example. That makes a lot of sense. You can tell something is wrong. Like if you work every day in the roastery, you can't explain it, but you know something is off. Baristas do this all the time. I could tell that shot is is not going to be good. I'm not even going to let it run the whole time. I know, because something is off. And that comes with experience. And I guess as much as possible, you want to try to bottle that in some way, as much as you can. But there's always this kind of interesting breath of life element that these relationships and the training and the care and the experience brings, that just sheer documentation can't. You have to just use these things as a part of a bigger organism, I suppose.
100%. And this kind of goes back to the original question that you had in terms of the thinking around the book as a whole, and really all of my work is iterative process optimization. Like without that way of thinking about it, this doesn't really work. And SOPs feel cold and feel like, oh, it's really corporate. Well, yes, it can be, or it can be, I'm going to steal from Seth Godin, culture. What is culture? Culture is people like us doing things in this way. And so when we think of operations, that's all it really is this is how we do things, not to be rigid, not to eliminate fun, but to do our job as best we can and to eliminate waste and to provide structure so that maybe you can go on vacation once in a while. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a great place to kind of finish here and say, for more conversation, I mean, getting this book, pre-order this book online and continue this conversation there, because it is, that iterative process is something that with a book like that, what you've written, you can use it as a manual to recalibrate your own energy to say that's why you call it the core 7, because it helps you identify ahead of time areas that if you follow these things, if you put your energy in these areas, good things are going to happen. Yeah. And I appreciate you coming on the show, Luke, and the work that you do to help people just go from where they are now to something naturally just greater and open up the potential of their roasteries. It's good for everyone. It's good for coffee. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So where is the pre-order for this? What website do we go to for that?
You can go to my website, Pomelo Coffee Consulting.com, and there's a little tab at the top that says, I believe, the book or book, I can't remember. And yeah, you can go there, pre-order. We're going to do a hard copy and a soft cover as well. So yeah, that's where you can find the book.
Well, thank you so much, Luke. It was great to talk to you.
Chris, what a treat. Thank you so much for being a generous host and letting me blab about the very dry topic that is roastery operations.
Thank you, sir. All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that and that it resonated with you and you got something from this conversation. If you did, you'll get a lot from the book. I especially love the people first approach that Luke takes on this. It is all about hospitality and service and systems to support the flourishing of people in the roastery. And so this, I no doubt, will be helpful for you. So huge thank you to Luke for joining us on the show today at this Rate of Rise series. Go get the book. Go sign up for pre-order at pomelocoffeeconsulting.com. Just fill out the information there. You'll be all set up, and check out what Luke has to offer for coffee roasting and coffee roastery owners over at pomelocoffeeconsulting.com. And if you have any questions or comments for me, then just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. Always happy to chat. Love listening to any feedback you have or ideas of things we can cover on the show, etc. So reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. And don't forget, millcityroasters.com. Awesome people. Great. Thank you so much to Mill City for sponsoring these episodes. And that's it. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you joining. And as always, I hope that these episodes have truly given you keys to the shop.